Hello everybody, TLG here. I'm going to be going over what I plan on starting on the Path of Exile Early Access. It's going to be starting tomorrow, December 6th. I will be streaming live. I'll be on Twitch. I will be doing a Rainbow Railroad charity stream that's being hosted by ISIMP, and I'll be joined by Doc Respawn. I hope some of y'all come by and we can maybe raise some money for a good cause. But other than that, I'm going to get into this build. Basically, it's going to build off of the Mercenary's crossbow. We got here 3 ammunition skills, 3 grenade skills. We're going to be using 2 different crossbows, a bolt-oriented one and a grenade-oriented one. And we're going to be weapon switching a lot, which I hope to make good use of, as that's a very interesting mechanic to me. We're going to be using a tri-LE crossbow for the bolts, and then a high fizz, and probably ailment, stun, threshold reducing, if that is a suffix available to us for the second crossbow here. It's going to be oriented towards the grenades. We do have 3 persistent buff effects, 1 meta gem, and just 2 personal auras here. So I'm going to go through real quick what these gems are, and then we're going to go over the general notion of the build, and then we'll go a bit deeper into the actual gem setups, and then I'll show you what I have planned out on our very pseudo-accurate, not really tree that we have from the community. So starting off, first skill I have down is Permafrost Bolts. It's going to do exactly what it says. We're going to hope to freeze our enemies forever. Get a bit more added cold damage from that Ice Bite support. I have a note here, Frostfire could also be good, and Ice Bite does require a kill to proc. We don't know how that'll feel, so we could do some moving around depending on how that goes. Same thing with Galvanic Shards. That's going to be our source of shock. We're going to have Innervate there. And then similarly, Stormfire could also be good since we are tri-ailment, so we will have Ignites going on from time to time as well. We'll just have to see how everything feels. Fragmentation rounds will be our hard-hitting ability. It's going to be centered around doing a lot of elemental damage and stacking a lot of % more damage multipliers. Can see we have some pretty interesting tech going here. Immolate for extra damage versus ignited enemies, Exploit Weakness for damage versus armor broken, so forth. I'm going to go a bit more down into the idea of it when we look at the gems individually. Flash Grenade is going to be our first grenade skill. It's going to be designed for getting our stuns and armor breaks. It's going to be really good for CC. Voltaic Grenade is going to be also another CC source. It's going to be for our electrocutes and give us a bit more of lightning exposure. Explosive Grenade will get our ignites up. We're going to hope for them to be a bit longer and give us that immolate bonus damage as well as apply the fire exposure. Elemental Invocation is going to hopefully, if it works as I'm believing it, give us a semi-automatic Enfeeble and Flame Wall cast for bonus damage and defenses. Overwhelming Presence gives us ailment and stun threshold reduction on enemies, hopefully get our ailments and our stuns up more easily. We're going to slap on a couple of supports for ours there. And then Scavenged Plating is going to be a source of additional armor for us for when we break armor with our flash grenades. Again, putting a couple of supportive persistent buff gems there as well. General information for this build. It's not going to be some super good OP build. It's not your Archmage Stormweaver. It's not your Super Slam Titan or Warbringer. It's going to be a build that's focused around making use of the new mechanics and combat style of Path of Exile 2. I hope it'll be very fun. It's going to be a very multi-click build. We're going to have 6 main abilities to use here, and the idea is that we want to play kind of reactionary and less so one button. Important note is ailments are different in Path of Exile 2 compared to Path of Exile 1. You'll notice how I'm talking about ailment threshold. Instead of having a flat % chance to inflict ailment on the correct elemental damage source, you're going to need to at least do enough elemental damage to overwhelm the ailment threshold of an enemy, and so that might be important in deciding whether our ailment producing skills need to have more damage on them, or if we can keep a lot of our utility support gems. This is a ranged build that's going to be basically played melee and very close range. That is because we are relying a lot on shotgunning. I'll go a bit over that later when I talk about the different pierce effects we have and just general idea of how we're going to play this build. But essentially, we won't need to worry as much about accuracy, but we will need to think a bit more about defenses so that we can manage being in point blank range. And then general playstyle note is that we're going to be wanting to, for the most part, for clearing general stuff, using permafrost and fragmentation, going around and freezing and then consuming it with the frag rounds, and just blasting our way through small mobs that way. When we come across rares, uniques, and bosses, we're going to want to put in a bit more rotation of our CC skills, specifically Flash Grenade, get a bit more damage on top of that. Now I'm going to go into the specific skills themselves. So we're going to start with the Permafrost. Permafrost, as you can see here, has 10 bolts per blast, and it gets 300% more freeze buildup. We're going to be wanting to get as much freeze buildup as possible, and we'll see that as well in how we are building up the support gems for it. Go for our first support gem, which is going to be Pierce. This will just help us get more enemies hit by the bolts, and if we do this, that means that more things can be frozen and we have less to worry about. Next one we got is Glaciation. Glaciation just causes even more freeze buildup. We may or may not see a huge increase because it's already so high from the base skill at 300%, but I feel like in a build where you're really wanting to get as much freeze as possible, this is really good. Then we're going to go to Ice Bite. Ice Bite means that when we get kills with our Permafrost bolts, we will get 35% of damage as added cold for 3 seconds on all attack skills. This is going to be a lot of damage, but it's not going to be consistent, just something to note. Next we have Frost Nexus. Frost Nexus is going to give us chilled ground when we freeze, which is going to be just more means of slowing down enemies and providing defenses. Last support is going to be Deep Freeze. Deep Freeze is going to be good for just keeping enemies frozen for longer. This will mean even more on bosses as they will become resistant over time. Our second skill I pointed out is going to be our Galvanic Shards. We don't really have much information here on the Path of Exile 2 database, but it will be a chaining electric crossbow attack. For our supports, we're going to go Chain. Of course, when you have Chain, you kind of want to play onto it. We don't really care as much about damage with hits, but having a lot more chains will allow us to shock a lot more enemies at once with our hits. Our next one is going to be Innervate. This is the lightning equivalent to Ice Bite. Of course, you do need to get kills with Galvanic Shards. We'll just see exactly how likely that is to happen. We can always switch things around if it seems less than likely. Next we have Conduction. Conduction just means more chance to shock, helps us get those shocks out with less hit damage, working really big on that ailment. Forcing Current is shock proliferation, really good. It's not 100%, but just any amount of shock proliferation is pretty good. And we don't know if this works once per shock, or once per attack, or once per shock on an enemy. If we are shocking multiple enemies at once, it's more than likely that Proliferate will do everyone that's nearby. Last one will be Lasting Shock, which is, of course, more shock duration. We will have to be a bit wary about if we are shocking enough because this does reduce our chance to shock. Our main skill will be Fragmentation Rounds, our last ammunition skill. Important things to note here is that it consumes freeze to do 300% more damage, it's shotguns, and has a natural 2 pierce. Looking into our support gems, we're going to be starting with Immolate. Immolate has 30% of damage as fire against ignited enemies. We're going to be hopefully getting ignites off with our explosive grenades, so this will just be a huge amount of damage as extra fire. Then we're going to be going into weapon elemental damage. As I stated before, we are going to be looking for an elemental damage crossbow for our ammunition skills. It's going to hit very hard when we have all that ele damage stacking. Then we're going to go exploit weakness. The efficacy of this is to be determined. Of course, we will need to get that armor break from our flash grenades and find out just how meaningful that is as it relates to consistent proccing of damage. Next, we're going to go to Many Bolts. Originally, I kind of passed up on this one without really looking into it too much, but at least with Permafrost and for the shotgun, we are firing 10 bolts per reload, and we're reloading after every attack, If we attack at least once a second, that is going to be 60% more damage, which is absolutely ridiculous for a skill support gem. Last one will be reload speed, which will, of course, play on the whole getting as many bolts reloaded as frequently as possible. Moving on to our first of our grenade skills, we are going to be doing Flash Grenade. Flash has a ton of stun buildup. It does blind, which will help our evasion padding just a bit. And so going into the supports for this, we're going to be looking for Devastate. Devastate means that we fully break armor when we inflict a heavy stun, which is going to be great for that Flash Grenade. We're going to go then to Overpower. Overpower gives us more stun buildup, just even more chance to get that heavy breakout. Armor Explosion is kind of an interesting one. This is just another way to maybe ignite something through fire damage. You do fire damage on breaking an enemy's armor. I have no clue if this will actually be of much help, but it will be at least some form of damage source out of the Flash Grenade that I think is going to be pretty interesting. And we have multiple projectiles. This is going to be good just to get us as many instances of a stun buildup at once. We really don't want to be kind of waiting around for our cooldowns to keep throwing out more flash grenades. We kind of want on cooldown, be able to stun something once and be done. Move on to our other skills. And then the last one will be reduce cooldown, just because this is kind of an important skill to always have up. Our next skill does not have an entry on PoEDB. It is going to be the Voltaic Grenade. I'm taking here out of Ziggady's video on the Mercenary he played at GGG's office during the announcement event. And so this is basically what I'm going off of. It's a grenade that electrocutes. Similarly, the first of the support skill gems is going to be Electrocute, which we don't have any information on. We just see it here in the gem cutting screen for Voltaic Grenade. Following that up, we're going to have Neural Overload. So Neural Overload, electrocute primed enemies on hit, and prime is going to be an interesting mechanic. It basically reduces the threshold required to apply an ailment, in this case electrocute, onto an enemy based off of their rarity. So I believe at 40%, normal mobs become primed, which means at 40% electrocute buildup, this will proc electrocute on an enemy, on a normal enemy, and it goes up to, I think, like 70 or 80% for uniques. So it does help us get electrocutes out more frequently. Next, we're going to have Execute. This is kind of just a throw-on for whatever amount of utility, more damage versus low life, and we're pairing that with Cull just to kind of like use this as a way to finish fights faster against our bosses. This can be moved around depending on how we seem fit. And then the last one will be Lightning Exposure. If I can spell. And this is just going to be using our grenades to inflict exposure. It does say in the tooltip here that it has to be a shock. If this is the case, we may move some stuff around between this and Galvanic Shard. However, I do believe, since it was a recommended, as you can see, support gem for Voltaic Grenade on the Ziggedy gameplay, that the Electrocute will also proc exposure. And if that's the case, I think a lightning exposure on the grenade will work just fine. Next skill we have is going to be the Explosive Grenade. Explosive Grenade is going to be basically our source of Ignite. We're going to be supporting it with Ignition. Ignition just gives it more chance to ignite. Eternal Flame gives it increased duration at the cost of a less chance to ignite. Hopefully we will not have that issue. Fire Exposure will also create exposure on the enemy when we do get that ignite off. Very good. Wildfire is the new Ignite Proliferation skill. It's significantly worse than Ignite Proliferation, so we might change this for maybe added fire damage, depending on how well this works versus how much more damage we need to actually get ignites off. And our last support gem for our explosive grenade will be less duration, which is going to be down here. Less duration, 30% less skill effect duration, and this is specifically targeting the explosive grenade's longer fuse duration, just to get it to explode quicker, because we are not using any detonation skills. Now moving on to our spirit gems, we're going to be starting with Elemental Invocation. Elemental Invocation is really interesting. We get energy upon either freezing, igniting, or shocking, which is going to play really well into our triple ailment build, and it's going to use our supported spells once we hit those thresholds. And so we are going to be using, in this case, Enfeeble, which is going to be our chosen curse. It's going to probably give us 20% to 25% less damage taken from bosses, which is going to be absolutely crazy for our survivability. We are going to be putting Heightened Curse on the Enfeeble just for more effect, and Focused Curse, and this should just get it to proc faster. Especially since we are not self-casting the curse, it's going to be auto-casted. We probably don't want to have to worry too much about the enemy running away while it's being automatically casted. Our second elemental invocation skill will be Flame Wall. Flame Wall will be really good for us because it gives projectiles added damage when they pass through, and we are using skills that use 10 projectiles at once, so that's going to be 10 times value for added damage. We do not have the issue of effectiveness of added damage anymore, so Flame Wall should be absolutely just game-breaking amounts of damage for any style projectile skill like Fragmentation Rounds or Permafrost Bolts or anything similar. We're going to be supporting that with Fortress, and this will either work in one of two ways. It's either Elemental Invocation will cast this on us, which we will then have a flame wall around us. This is fine because it means that as long as we are stationary, we get the huge amounts of damage. Or as I bet it will actually proc, it's going to target an enemy. This will feel a bit sloppy against non-bosses, but when you are in a boss fight, it essentially means that you're putting a circle around the boss that empowers all of your spells, or all of your projectile skills. And because of that, it's going to be really easy just to get a ton of passive damage, since it will be from any angle you can shoot from. So as long as the boss isn't too mobile, definitely a huge boon to your damage. Going on to our next, we are going to be looking at the Overwhelming Presence, which is a leaked persistent buff skill. And basically, enemies in your presence have reduced elemental ailment threshold and stun threshold. And this is going to be crucial for us to get those stuns and ailments off. I think this is going to be a very underrated persistent buff, as people are probably not really thinking about how much they're going to want to apply ailments and stuns to get enemies CC'd. We will be doing 2 supports for this, just putting in Vitality, which is going to give us a bit of life regen, and Clarity for mana regen. And this is just very passive, nothing to worry about. Similarly, we are going to be getting Scavenged Plating. This is going to help us when we armor break with our flash grenades to get stacks of Scavenged Plating. Gives us more armor, gives us a bit of thorns, which will be used. It's not essentially the thing that we are caring too much about, but since we will be pseudo melee, it will provide some level of value. And then on Scavenged Plating, we'll be putting Herbalism and Cannibalism. This is going to give us life recovery on kill and increased recovery from life flasks. And this is kind of how we will be dealing with sustain, especially early on before we have any sort of life regeneration. And so that's basically the rundown on the skills themselves. Now I'm going to go over the tree, which I've kind of looked into a little bit here. Now I'll go over the idea of my pathing. So, pretty sure these are supposed to be. Wow, that is very dim. Whatever it is, though. So here, I'm going to go over the ascendancy later. I'll start with, first off, the initial pathing of the tree. I'm thinking of starting for these projectile nodes right over here, and we're going to be going into Remorseless. I feel like this is going to be the best start for getting enough damage early game. We're then going to travel down here into Ricochet, Here's a really important thing to note. We can chain from terrain, so getting Pierce on skills will allow us to more likely get an additional attack from the terrain itself, and that's going to be a huge thing for these shotgun skills that are firing 10, so you're essentially getting 20% more damage per blast with that 20% chance to chain. Really good. I'm planning on going down first and getting more nodes, but we will also want, when we get a bit more of the grenades, to pick up this volatile catalyst one. This will give us AoE and cooldown effect, and then once we get more into our ailments, we're going to be getting exposed wounds. When we have enough damage early game, I do plan on just hopping over, grabbing Feel No Pain and Battle Hardened. These are going to be great defensive nodes, but usually, especially early game, you want to focus a bit more on getting damage before getting your defenses higher, although these will be good to get as soon as possible as they are pretty close. Going down the tree, we're going to be basically going down right down the center and then eventually picking up this grenade cluster here. This is going to be good. We will want to have this on our weapon switch for our grenade crossbow, so we don't use these points up for our crossbow skills. Similarly, later on, we will be actually rerouting through this tree to go down this way for the ailments, because we do care about ailments more than the projectile damage, and we will be turning this ricochet into a crossbow 1, which is going to be for our bolts only skill, and we're going to be putting volatile catalyst on our grenade only crossbow and making use of those weaponry specific skill sets. Going down, we will be claiming Adrenaline Rush. Adrenaline Rush will be on our combined tree because we want to have that all the time. Then from here, we will be forking off in every direction. Down, we will be claiming this Distracting Presence. I was thinking of maybe putting this as weapon tree, the grenade weapon tree only. However, I think we would want this on all the time for the enemies have reduced recovery rate, and that's just going to be really good when we go back and look at concentration as well for pairing with that. Here we have increased chance to inflict ailments with projectiles, very important for us. And then we're going to pick up Shrapnel for our weapon set 1 for our ammunition attacks, just to get that additional terrain chaining. At this point, between this and Ricochet, we will have 50% extra damage from terrain Ricochet, which is really good. Looking down here at this crossbow wheel, we'll be claiming reusable ammunition. This is going to be really good because it'll just give us more chances to shoot with our shotgun attacks. We will also be claiming full salvo. We will be firing 3 different shotgun style spells or skills between the permafrost bolts, galvanic shards, and the fragmentation rounds. And 75% increased damage I feel like is fine enough, especially since you only have to shoot the galvanic shard once every 10 seconds. Very low investment. Here we're just going to give us for our grenade tree, it's just going to be a 15% chance to activate a second time. Really big boon for when it procs. Moving over just a bit here, Giant Slayer is going to give us a bit more power against rare uniques, increasing our damage and accuracy rating, but most importantly, more ailments, chance to inflict ailments, really attacking that threshold. Looking further on the right side of the tree, we are going to claim the volatile grenades for our weapon set 2 for our grenade crossbow. And then we're going to climb down here into this elemental wheel, get emboldened avatar for our both sets. Going to give us a bunch of ailment buildup, and then force of nature for elemental penetration on both of our weapon sets. Looking over to the left, we will be going down here to this node to Perfect Opportunity. This is going to give us increased stun buildup, and hits are lucky against heavy stunned enemies. Of course, with the way we're playing, we're going to be using our flash grenade to get heavy stun off on bosses or really difficult to kill enemies. That's going to proc armor break. Hopefully they're already frozen, and then when we do come by with the fragmentation round, claim that 300% more damage against freeze, 50% more from exploit weakness. If they're ignited, you get that immolate, etc., and that's a lucky hit. It's going to be an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage that we are likely to pull off pseudo reliably. We're also going to go down a bit here into this wheel, We're going to get armor break duration and attack area damage for our weapon set 2. This is going to be good for our flash grenades specifically, so we don't really care too much of that on our first crossbow. And then we're going to do the same thing for authority, area of effect, and CDR. Just good for our grenades. One thing I did do is I ventured off a bit here. I want to just simply highlight this node. I'm not too sure if we will actually end up going here. It's going to be elemental damage with attack skills, as well as fizz conversion to damage of a different element taken from hits. This was very present before in Path of Exile, recently nerfed in the Settlers League. And what it does do is provide a lot of synergy with Sorcery Ward, which I'll go over shortly. And if we can get like between 30 to 50% fizz conversion to elemental, that's going to be really big for our defenses. And I'll show you here on the Witch Hunter. And that is because of this special skill called Sorcery Ward. So here we get Sorcery Ward at the cost of armor and evasion rating. And essentially what that means is that we lose half of our armor and evasion rating to get an elemental Aegis-like buff, and that's essentially a shield for elemental damage equivalent to 30% of the armor and evasion rating we have. So we definitely still want to stack armor and evasion rating even though it's getting reduced here, especially since we do still need to be wary of physical hits. Going further, we get increased effective Sorcery Ward as well as faster recovery, and this will help it so that we really have a lot of anti-element protections. And so with this, if we convert a decent amount of our fizz hit or fizz damage taken as into elemental, we really use this buffer well, and we do have enough armor to take smaller fizz hits. We should be very tanky. Our first two nodes we're likely to actually pick up are going to be these two though, Witchbane and No Mercy. Witchbane by itself is not that phenomenal. It will be an effective defensive measure versus bosses by reducing their CDR by 50%. We will have to see how easy it is to maintain concentration. However, since we do have a form of Ignite, I find it hard to believe that concentration will not have permanent uptime. But more importantly is No Mercy, which is 30% more damage to enemies based on missing concentration. And concentration is fully lost at 40% of life damage taken. So this is important to note because that means between 60% and 0% of the enemy's life, you're getting 30% more damage, and then you are still getting more damage as long as they have any amount of life essentially taken. It just scales up most after that 40% damage threshold. And so this will be good for taking out stronger enemies and staying alive. And that's why we are going Witch Hunter. I also just generally really like the theme and really want to go deeper into this thematic. I do have just an idea of the nodes that will be taken differently between the two weapon sets. So this is kind of where the notables will be going for weapon set 1 versus the notables will be going for weapon set 2. You'll see that there are mostly overlaps, but some have specific skills, such as weapon set 2 really focusing on grenades, and weapon set 1 really focusing on chaining. And that's basically the idea I have going into early access tomorrow, and I really hope that it works out well. It's not tested, obviously. I've never had any access to early content of Path of Exile 2, and so this is going to be a complete learning experience. And I plan on creating update videos as I go on to really show exactly where this build goes, how far I can take it, and whether or not I make any major decisions that offshoot from this basis. I hope everyone enjoyed, got a bit inspired maybe, or is just wishing for my downfall, whatever it may be. I hope you enjoyed the time here, hearing me talk about my tri-elemental AILMENT Witch Hunter theorycraft. And I'll see you next time, probably in terms of a death compilation on the YouTube from stream highlights. See you everyone, it's been a good time. Bye.